Once the decision to actually engage a tutor has been made, a lot of the time the first question I get is, how often do you think this tutor should visit? So should it be once a fortnight, once a week, twice a week? Now the answer obviously depends really largely on the student that we're talking about, but a good rule of thumb to get started is once a week for any student up to around the year 11 level, and then roughly 1.5 hours per week for anyone in VCE or year 11 and 12. That's a really basic guideline just to help you get started. Now, a lot of the time, students in the higher year level will require a little bit more than that, often pushing up to as high as 2, or in situations where a lot of help is required, even 3 hours of tutoring per week. In the younger year levels, 1 hour is usually sufficient unless the student has had a long history of struggling with maths. So if they're finding that they're struggling with concepts that were covered 2 or 3 years ago, then it's probably useful to try and get 2 hours per week out of a student in order to try and catch up on some of that stuff so that when we get back into doing the classwork, they're up to speed. Now, this might not be 2 hours indefinitely. It might be 2 hours a week for maybe a term or so, which will give the tutor a chance to catch up on all the past work and hopefully get the student up to speed. And once they're up to speed and keeping up with the rest of the class, it's very easy just to drop your tutoring back down a level. I wouldn't advise any more than 2 hours per week for anyone unless they're studying year 12 and are working quite intensely, as anything too strenuous on a particular student might cause them to start resenting the topic. So you don't really want students starting to resent the fact that they're having tutoring 3 times a week, because in the end they won't respond to the tutoring as well as if we were, say, maybe working on an hour or 2 a week. That sort of gives them a nice little break, it's not too often, it's not too much, and that will help them foster that love and passion that we're actually looking for out of students. So you don't want to overload them with tutoring too much, because otherwise you'll find that they will actually learn to resent it. On the other side, going too little tutoring will develop an inconsistency, which means that everything that the student and tutor does tends to get forgotten. So I try to advise against going with a system like once a fortnight, because while it may seem like once a week is too much for a student who is doing quite well, that consistency, more than the content itself, is usually what keeps a student working really well. You'll find that if you're looking at doing tutoring only once a fortnight, in all honesty, it's probably not actually worth getting tutoring at all. Stick with a minimum of once a week to make sure that the student is consistent and working diligently every single week. Now, if you need to bump that up to a little bit more, according to how the student is working, that's totally fine. It's very easy to organise, but that's definitely a good standard to at least get started. Once the tutor gets in and starts working with the student, they will be able to provide a lot of feedback as to what they think might be the best decision moving forward in terms of how often you have your tutor visit.